In every corner of our planet, people are anchored by their homes. It is the construction sector that creates these highly personal spaces, environments that provide billions with the basic psychological needs of security, comfort, warmth, and belonging. Environments that govern how people feel, interact, and develop. Environments that have the ability to shape our societies. Around the world, the demand for homes is increasing as our population expands, and now outstrips the rate at which we can construct these critical spaces. Our changing cultures are disrupting established home-building conventions. Our cities are expanding faster and are now more densely occupied than at any time in human history. So how can we overcome these challenges? How do we create high-quality homes that positively shape our global society? And how can such an extreme context drive innovation from the architecture, engineering, and construction sectors?
The pressure is on now to deliver a lot of housing. So the question we ask is, how do you do that well at high density?
We have to be very careful. We don't want to just get rid of whole swathes without appreciating the context or the history that's gone with it.
It's not about vanity or ego for us. We're just trying to deliver things that people need in a more sustainable way that doesn't harm the planet.
People need to have a sense of identity over the place in which they live, and I think there can be things that you can draw out from local context and that drive design and make a place unique.
When you design any building, you're creating an opportunity for the people that inhabit that to inhabit it in a good way, in a way that improves the quality of their living or working and generally just lifts the spirit, and in a sense architecture should lift the spirit.
This is how the concept of housing is being reinvented for our truly urban age. While many nations are currently experiencing challenges with housing, the situation facing the UK is one of the most urgent in the developed world. The UK housing market has come under increasing pressure over recent decades, and the country is now in the midst of a housing crisis. That is, the rising demand for homes is not being met by sufficient levels of housing supply. A number of factors have created the current situation on both the supply and demand sides of the equation. Firstly, the UK population continues to steadily grow in size, predominantly as a result of migration, rising birth rates, and falling mortality rates. Data from the UK's Office for National Statistics, or ONS, shows that the country's population has expanded from 39.8 million people in 1900 to almost 67 million people today. Furthermore, the UK population will continue to rise and is expected to reach 72 million people by 2041. Such growth significantly increases the demand for homes. Compounding the challenge, ONS data also indicates that the average number of people living in a property has decreased significantly in recent decades, principally as younger people choose to start families later in life and as the elderly population expands. On the supply side, the UK is currently not constructing enough new and affordable homes. There are a variety of reasons for this, ranging from funding and the availability of land to build on, to the bureaucracy of the country's planning system, a severe reduction in the number of small house builders since the 2008 financial crisis, and insufficient numbers of skilled operatives entering the construction workforce. This perfect storm of high demand and insufficient supply drives increased land and property values, manifesting in a shortage of affordable housing for those on middle and low incomes, or for those looking to get onto the housing ladder. Quite aside from these demographics, the definition of affordable is becoming ever more stretched in cities and major urban areas. The shortage of supply also impacts social housing. Shelter, a charity that seeks to end homelessness and poor housing in England and Scotland, estimates that 3 million new social homes need to be constructed in England alone over the next 20 years. In parallel to its housing crisis, an increasing proportion of the UK population are now choosing to live in cities. This trend is currently being mirrored in countries around the world, primarily as rural communities migrate into urban areas. Research by the United Nations projects that 60% of the global human population will be living in cities by 2030. In this context, major urban areas are becoming something of the front line in the housing crises facing many nations. This can be clearly witnessed in a number of UK cities, including Birmingham, Manchester and Glasgow. However, nowhere is the challenge more pronounced than in London, the UK's capital and one of the largest urban areas in Europe. While the relentless pressure to construct homes at a rapid rate here does result in some less than desirable schemes coming to fruition, fueling continued debate around housing standards, planning regulations, political representation, social cohesion and inequality, the intensity of the challenge is in fact breeding innovation from some of the city's foremost architects and developers. From urban dentistry to embracing cross-laminated timber, these remarkable schemes master their highly demanding physical and economic contexts to create truly unique homes that challenge the established preconceptions around delivering sufficient levels of housing in one of the world's most densely occupied cities.
The Watts Grove scheme is a 100% affordable scheme for Swan. It's a multi-storey CLT volumetric scheme that provides 65 much-needed homes in Tower Hamlets. The modules will be fabricated in Swan's factory out in Basildon, and the scheme will be on site later this year. One of the reasons that Swan have looked towards off-site manufacture is they want to control their supply chain. As a housing association, they want to provide affordable homes, and London is obviously a large market for that. What they had with this scheme was an outline kind of concept design in a traditional way, which they decided they wanted to construct in modular. And so we kind of got on board at that stage once that shift from a traditional kind of scheme to an off-site scheme was on the table. And that was on the basis of our kind of CLT knowledge. The scheme at Watts Grove specifically incorporates 158 modules, 85 different types, which does sound like a lot. But actually the important thing to understand with off-site modular construction is that it's really about repeatable processes and customizable products. And that efficiency in the process allows you to customize those modules in a different way. So that means for a traditional site that was kind of given to us and not developed in that way originally, or not foreseen as being an off-site modular scheme from the outset, we've been able to adapt the design to deliver that. So typically when we talk about CLT, we talk about large format solid timber panels. The way in which they're engineered means that you get a lot of strength from a single panel, and those panels, like I say, can be digitally fabricated to whatever size and shape you kind of need. So It's got a lot of versatility in terms of its forms that it can generate. With modular construction, those benefits are the same, except you can realise them within a factory environment. So instead of single panels being created and shipped to site, we can build whole units that are then put on the back of a lorry and delivered. So for urban sites, and particularly in the London context where we have a massive housing shortage, we can get the homes that we need much quicker and more cost effectively onto more difficult sites. People associate homes with the kind of red brick stuff you find out in the countryside more often than not. I think working in a London environment, there's more kind of willingness to innovate and willingness to try new materials. And I think for a lot of people, they associate timber with kind of pure sustainability. But for us, although that's always a starting point and an ethos for the practice, we really believe in the material because of the way in which prefabrication offers so many other benefits over traditional means of construction. Speed, that production trains on site, reduction of waste, ease of fabrication, all of which kind of helps it to be a kind of 21st century material. CLT is combustible. It's not worth pretending it isn't, but what we do know about timber is it burns predictably. So the best analogy we can say is if you imagine a log on a fire, you know when you put it on there it will burn over time, but it burns slowly and it chars, and it's that charring that protects the timber. So we know that, we understand that, and we design for that. So with our designs and with our working with the structural engineers on these jobs, we usually allow for a certain amount of the timber to char within the kind of structural design, and then we supplement that with plasterboard and other products. In that way, it's no different to the way in which you would protect a steel beam, where it's kind of intumescently coated and then finished with plasterboard. Similarly with concrete, it's about coverage over the rebar. So it's really just about an understanding of the material and how to use it. And in that way, it's no more dangerous, we don't think, than any other material.
So urban dentistry is this idea of the in-between spaces. So cities have often very iconic buildings or iconic spaces, and the idea of urban dentistry is what happens in between. And that can be a tool for starting new narratives, new types of design, or new ways of thinking about space. You can also bring that into this idea of housing. So housing, again, has evolved. We have lots of different eras of housing. We do need to increase density. Also, we need to improve housing. So you can look at this idea of urban dentistry as carefully picking apart what's there or adding to what's there in that sort of surgical precision. I think that's where this idea of dentistry comes from, very precise and very careful, and maybe slightly scraping away the bits that don't work and putting in bits that do work. One of the projects that I think particularly caught the attention of people and was important to us was the Slim House. An old stable passage in South London between two buildings, 2.3 metres wide, which is narrower than a tube carriage. There was an existing, very small existing house there, and we essentially knocked pretty much all of it down apart from the front facade and built a 2.3 metre wide, 3-storey, 3-bed house. But there what we were doing was saying, well, yes, it's slim, but how can actually we work with these spaces to achieve, a quality of space and the delight of architecture that you would get in other buildings? And we used that project as a sort of catalyst for being able to talk about these types of spaces, so these in-between spaces. Paxton House was an old office building. We took this concrete office block, kept the superstructure, and developed this housing. The principle behind it was the same as with this urban dentistry concept. An awkward site overlooking an existing building. How could we achieve a high quality of living space that also made economic sense to the developer, of course, but also to people buying? So it's in Croydon, so it's slightly less expensive, so we could deliver one-bed units that people could genuinely afford. It was built as a build-to-rent scheme, and since then some of those have been sold. It came with this idea of build-to-rent, which is about, I suppose it's about the same as a lot of housing, but also a focus on how can we sort of create these incidental moments where people congregate. At the start, The plan for the building meant that there was some quite poorly conceived apartments that only received north light. We used the slim house design to flip that. We put all the circulation to the north side, external circulation, which again brings down the cost. We also put the services there. Again, easy access brings down the cost. And it also meant that we could produce these slim flats that were all double aspect and all of them faced south or southwest. People are expecting a certain solution, which is a normal solution to that problem. And obviously what we're often trying to do is slightly twist that and say, well, what could we do? We have done projects which are a blank field, and that's a totally different challenge. But I think most of our work happens in this complex, highly complex urban environment. Complex in terms of policy, but complex in terms of its urban fabric, what we're trying to achieve in terms of sustainability and the environment. And all of those parameters together actually set up something where I think innovation really shines. That challenge is really important, but also not accepting the normal results, from those challenges.
Bradford Log West is a development in Hounslow in West London, next to the Grand Union Canal, that reimagines an industrial wharf site. And in total it'll deliver over 500 homes for local need. May were appointed to design phase 2, which is 157 homes, including apartments, townhouses, a mix of 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom homes, 4 bedroom even, to meet a range of needs in the area.
The project came about, the client is a joint venture between Muse and the Canal and River Trust. It's a brownfield site that has been identified for regeneration. The broader moves in the master plan is to connect Brentford High Street and the canal and Brentford Station, and generally make an underused area of Brentford now more connected.
The pressure in London to deliver more housing is enormous, and the focus is going to be on brownfield sites like this more and more. I think there's a realistic and rightful kind of resistance to develop the green belt, and actually a lot of our housing need can be delivered on repurposed sites. And retaining some of the character in the architecture, so actually developing site-specific responses, so you're not getting kind of generic identikit housing, but actually in Brentford Log West we've developed an architecture that responds to the interesting wharf nature of a site, references some of the old industrial forms, the sawtooth roof for example, which you might see on old industrial buildings, but here in our building creates lovely vaulted roofs on the top floor apartments, which in turn bring light into the depth of a plan. And as a way that we always develop our design responses to try and unearth and uncover the character and almost the DNA of a site that allows us to develop a site-specific response.
So I suppose it's a mixture of responding to the industrial past and then trying to marry that with the human scale of a neighbouring conservation area, which is very much residential, Georgian, part of London. So picking up cues in terms of garden walls, gable ends of houses, front gardens, all these things that kind of enrich that part of the town. So having a richer ground floor experience and streetscape, and then having the backdrop of the larger buildings behind.
Brentford offers us clues about how we think good outer borough housing can be delivered. A number of things that we tried to innovate in the project were a new typology of, or residential block type of villas connected by townhouses. The villa plan allows us to create a lot of dual aspect apartments with generous outdoor space, really kind of attractive, well lit, generous internal spaces. So although it's apartments, in a borough that typically would kind of want townhouses perhaps, or even semi-detached houses, we've created a mix that we think lends itself well to boroughs that need high density, they need to deliver numbers, but at the same time delivering high proportion of family housing. Brentford will be taking some of those ideas forward into our other schemes. Every project we do tries to reimagine how we might live today and how we can create homes fit for the 21st century.
For me, seeing something that has been years in the making, working on something from initial concept through to seeing it built is really special, and hearing good things and the fact that people want to live there and see it as a place they want to live is really important.
From reimagining the waterside to embracing off-site techniques and adapting existing structures, these schemes prove that the challenges of this city's housing crisis can be overcome through innovation, and that the urgency of the climate does not have to drive the delivery of knee-jerk, reactionary developments that sacrifice quality and architecture in order to achieve speed. The success of each of these schemes in such a densely occupied city offers lessons and guidance for those grappling with the need to deliver housing in major urban areas around the world, and powerfully demonstrates the innovation, creativity and ingenuity that is prevalent throughout our remarkable sector. The world's most important industry that has the ability not just to build houses, but to create homes for every human being on our planet.